What's up, everyone? Connor O'Hanlon here for another episode of the Greater Society podcast. But tonight is not any old Greater Society podcast. This is the Greater Society State of the Union, the first inaugural State of the Union. This is not going to be, of course, every episode is a little bit of me just riffing and giving my spiel. But tonight is a mixture of us looking and critiquing and praising when applicable President Biden's State of the Union address, what he has done well, maybe some of the stuff that he has not done so well, and where we can move forward. And I'll give you some initial thoughts up front too on the actual speech, the delivery, etc. And then after we'll talk through some of the stuff that were the reactions, the Republican reaction, and I will tell you throughout. This is why it's partly the Greater Society State of the Union, is because even where I find that things are really good, we can always continue to be better or greater or however you want to put it. And that's where, as Americans, we have to strive for. So that's something that will be interwoven throughout. And then, of course, at the end, too, I will just say, like, this was completely forgotten or ignored or intentionally ignored. So with that being said, we can just hop right into the meat and potatoes of this. And there's not many clips today, so if you don't enjoy engaging in chat or just listening to me, then might not be the ideal episode for you. But if you enjoy analyzing this stuff and looking forward and being proactive in our policy agendas, in our progressive ideology, and pushing things forward, not in reaction to, but proactively for the American people, this is the episode for you then. So, first off, I have to say, despite everybody's, not everybody, I guess some people really, really love Biden, but I think a lot of people understand that he is 80 years old. He is quite literally the oldest president ever. So for him to give a speech that is like super energetic or whatever is not exactly expected. And I think he came out a little bit slow, and it came out at the end much more entertaining, energetic, engaging than I would have expected, or I did expect, and I think almost anybody would have expected based on the prior two speeches that he gave, the State of the Union and the one that he gives like right after being elected. That being said, there are the specific issues that come up throughout this. So, the interweaving of policy with, like, hey, I'm going to highlight the story, is always something that the State of the Union has done. And I think that Biden highlighting those stories while also touting his achievements was a good move. And I think a lot of the stuff that he talked about throughout the speech that were his achievements are some of the most bold and progressive things that he has run on or done in his 2 years as president. Now, again, this is where it's like we have to work within the construct of the system that we're within. The Democrats had a 50-50 split Senate. So some of the stuff that he's touting is like the act where he, is helping veterans, and we talked about this, the PACT Act, where they're helping and fixing healthcare and providing for costs for veterans that are impacted by tar pits, which is like one of those things that like should just be a universal bipartisan. Oh yeah, of course, that's great. That is, of course, not the case in America at this point, where our two-party system is so divided that we can't even come together and get a universal application for that. And but that is one of his, crown jewels. You got to give it to him. That is something that I supported. I still do support, obviously. Then, talking specifically about the Inflation Reduction Act, and we'll get into like the specifics of the breakdown of policy here in a second, like not policy that's passed, but policy that might be coming, or like the stuff that he kind of highlighted in the general issue set rather than the policy that's already been completed. Basically, the Inflation Reduction Act, and again, this act will come out throughout the healthcare issue, the economy issue, but overall speaking, that is one of the most progressive policies that is probably passed in the last 40 years. It is one of the most bold climate change bills to tackle the emissions. It is one of the most bold changes to healthcare, as we will talk about when I talk about the healthcare issue. It does and will impact spending and growth, which will impact inflation, as we will talk about. These are all like bread and butter things, and now that it's going into play, is something that is going to continue to be felt by the American people in the most positive way possible, assuming that we don't go into a recession again, which we will talk about in the economy part. But these are straight up just positive changes and positive things that he passed under his administration. The next thing would be the infrastructure, the bipartisan infrastructure bill. Again, the bipartisan part being overemphasized throughout all of this. Biden is one of those presidents that really, really values the idea of bipartisanship, despite the Republicans calling him the devil, basically. He touted this infrastructure bill, all over the place, and I think it fell short in some cases because of the lack of investments in sustainable and renewable energy systems that are necessary. So remember that this bipartisan infrastructure package was part of a dual process with Build Back Better, which got cut and ended up being basically the Inflation Reduction Act eventually, after Joe Manchin renamed it and gutted some of the pieces of it. Again, the healthcare pieces that were key, and we will talk about that. But the infrastructure package is something that he touted. I don't think that he does it enough, honestly. I think just because it's touted as bipartisan, that's where everyone's like, oh yeah, that's great. But like actual infrastructure investments, where our infrastructure is rated as like a D in America, I was thinking about it because he talks about this bridge in the speech. He talked about this bridge from Cincinnati. It goes from Cincinnati into Kentucky, and I've walked across that bridge to get to Kentucky. And it was funny because he's literally talking about this specific bridge. And yeah, that bridge is in rough shape. Like, you can just see it. You can look at it, and the infrastructure around this area. Cincinnati's pretty nice, but when you're going over to the border to Kentucky, when you cross the border to Kentucky, there's things that are clearly underinvested in, and that's just broader critiques of infrastructure, real estate, businesses, education. All of that, right? But it is something that I was glad to see him highlight, and I was literally talking about it earlier in the day because he had Mitch McConnell at the bridge last month. But in my opinion, while on this note, I think that the rhetoric around the infrastructure package should begin to be more like, we are building new bridges, we are repairing bridges, we are building new tunnels, we are repairing tunnels. Like, this type of reiteration of like, you don't want potholes on your highways, because remember that your streets and roads are usually owned by the state or the local government, but the federal government is providing the states and local governments with the funds to fix this stuff. So you don't want potholes? Well, this is the type of bill that you want. You don't want your bridges collapsing? This is the type of policy you want. Infrastructure goes beyond that. There is a piece of that goes into investing into charging stations. Great investment. I don't have an electric car yet, but someday I hope to. So that's something that is a good investment longer term that will pay off dividends as long as, I think that costs should be kept within check because, again, this is something that is publicly funded, but that is a bridge to cross at another time. Then we have the not so good stuff, I guess, that happens under Biden's administration. Namely, not necessarily stuff that happened because of him, but just despite anybody being in office, like the Supreme Court overturning Roe versus Wade. The honestly, I would say that the hitting of this issue is very off and on. I think like sometimes people nail it on the head, and sometimes it's like, like that's not really. He kind of fumbled his words around this part where he's talking about like protecting Roe, but like you can't protect Roe because it already is gone. So that's a nitpick. That's a critique of rhetoric. What he's talking about is protecting the precedent set forth by Roe versus Wade, the constitutionally protected right, or at least it formally was the constitutionally protected right of abortion and control of a woman's reproductive system being in her hands, not in the government's hands. That's the type of stuff that like that's a minor nitpick in like his actual rhetoric, but I think emphasizing it and building upon that even more and saying like, look, the Supreme, I know he's not going to do this, but the Supreme Court is a busted institution, and the continuation of supporting this institution underwriting the constitutional protections of the United States, the people of the United States, is not what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to interpret rules and laws and not be throwing out precedent willy-nilly and taking away rights of 50% of the population. While on this will be the first like full like issue, I suppose. While on this topic and this issue, in my opinion, something that we could have done better and something that we, in the Greater Society platform, which, by the way, I'm working on, the Greater Society platform protects the right, not just of abortion, but to access to free and or low-cost birth control options beyond just abortion services. Because here's the thing is, if you really want to rhetorically, and this sparring happened in live time, not about this issue, but about Social Security and Medicare, as we'll discuss. But if you want to spar rhetorically with these folks that, want to ban abortion, think that it's murder or whatever, the counter narrative is that if you want to reduce abortions, one, making them safe and legal is proven to lower the rate of abortions. But two, making birth control, specifically birth control for females, because male birth control is already dirt cheap, but female birth control being included with insurance because it's a much different process is key. Protecting women's rights to choose not just for abortion, but for their own sovereignty over their body through the healthcare system is key. And that is, maybe that's a little too in depth for State of the Union, but I think while this is like this big issue, and the 14th Amendment is what protects the right to have private birth control and like have that period, the 14th Amendment was what the Roe versus Wade was held up upon, the right to privacy. And that was obviously thrown out. So very quickly, we could start to see this spiral, as we've talked about in the past. But while we're talking about healthcare, let us dive and switch into the issue of healthcare based on Biden's speech, and then I'll give you what was missing. Biden talked about the expansion of Medicaid under the ACA. Specifically, he talked about the ACA providing, I think it was 16 million people healthcare. That includes the exchanges based on just being an individual, but it also includes expanding healthcare to people through Medicaid in the states that expanded Medicaid coverage that would, provide subsidies for people that needed it. That's a good thing. Remember, whenever leftists or progressives critique, and maybe I shouldn't say whenever, because some people maybe don't agree with this, but at least from my perspective in the Greater Society podcast platform, uh, the ACA is a great piece of legislation. It is an excellent step forward, but that's all it is. It is a step forward. It is not the finish line. That's what we always have to remember, is that there are still millions of people in this country that don't have health care. There are still people in this country, millions of them, that are underinsured. They can't actually see a doctor because they don't have the money to pay the bill or the copay or the deductible, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? That is a key part to note. But the ACA was monumentally popular after it became law, after it became less fear-mongered about. And frankly, let's remember that Donald Trump tried to repeal and, quote, replace. He didn't have an actual replacement, so they just tried to repeal it. And even, Republicans rejected that in the end. John McCain famously, if we want to be gracious, he saved the ACA. And that is wonderful. I'll finish. I want to jump to what we should be doing, but the other side of this on the healthcare issue is that the Inflation Reduction Act included a $35 cap on insulin vials for seniors. So his proposal during the actual speech was to expand that $35 cap to all people in the United States that need insulin. He brought it up, and this is something that I like to repeat, and especially in like discussions with people, but the guy that created insulin, that literally could have patented it and made ungodly amounts of money, because there are so many people throughout the world, but in America, that need insulin. He chose not to copyright it and sold the rights to it for $1. So when we talk about research and development, when we talk about developing drugs, everyone loves to bring up you have to be driven by profits to make this possible. That is not the case. Governments can choose and to prioritize and fund research and development. Now, profit motive does drive some of that, but a lot of research and development for pharmaceutical drugs is funded by the public dollar. And that leads me into the final piece, which Biden says this at the end. He talks about HIV, AIDS, and cancer. And specifically on the cancer part, that is something that Biden has kind of alluded to a number of times. And if this is the case, this would be awesome. But he's looking to fund even more research and trying to end cancer and find more money to fund these research, outlets to combat different forms of cancer, which I think would be, obviously, if there was a president that helped do that and cancer was cured like 100%, well, maybe not 100% because that's probably not likely at this point, but we found a cure for cancer under their presidency, that would be like landing on the moon. But where this issue falls short and what our platform agenda should be or could be is that we need to actually get serious about forming, funding, and developing a universal healthcare system. One way or the other. My ideal is a universal healthcare system that is publicly funded. I don't care if it's an NHS style system or if it's a Medicare for all style system. I personally, have a slight preference for the NHS style because I think that the profit motive needs to be taken out of some of these things. I think that there is benefits to providing good, strong union jobs to nurses and doctors. And having them be a part of the public sector is more likely to include them in the stronger side of unionization, providing that they can make money. And while there's not that give and the take. Making sure that working conditions for nurses are actually good. That is something that we don't talk about. We kind of forget that under COVID, nurses literally were risking their lives day in and day out, same with doctors. But nurses kind of bear the brunt of that. So specifically talking about that in a healthcare topic, it's brought up in passing, but that is something that is key. We all deserve, not some of us, not a portion of us. Every single person in this country deserves to have healthcare, because without healthcare, you cannot ensure one of the most fundamental rights that everybody has in this country, and that is the right to life. You cannot, and I will repeat that, you cannot guarantee the right to life without providing people healthcare and health coverage that they need to get to see a doctor, to get the surgery that they need, to not risk going bankrupt, to not have to risk going to the emergency room and then getting a surprise bill that will put them, way back, having to skip paying rent, getting evicted, or having to ration their prescription drugs. And on that topic, remember when I talked about Joe Manchin undercutting the Build Back Better plan? Well, the Inflation Reduction Act capped Medicare recipients getting insulin at $35 per vial. That does not include everybody. Again, Biden suggested that it'll be for everybody moving forward if he can pass that. Now, the other part of this is that the Build Back Better plan had allowed Medicare to negotiate all drug prices, and that what that would do is lower costs for consumers. So through Medicare, it's for seniors, but if you do this, you lower costs for seniors, you would lower the cost for the taxpayers. And if you lower the cost per prescription drugs for taxpayers, guess what happens? The deficit and the debt that the Republicans love to LARP about when they are not in power, the deficit actually goes down. The deficit would go down because you are reducing the profit-driven motive in prescription drugs, not eliminating it. Remember that these pharmaceutical companies, these big ones especially, are extremely profitable. They receive funding from the government for R&D. They get public funding through research at public universities. Prescription drugs should have. This is not to say that we need to nationalize it. We don't need to do any of that stuff necessarily. Although there's maybe some argument for some of that. But right now, if we're living in the practical world, allowing Medicare to negotiate prices will benefit the average American. It'll save money for them in taxes, and it'll save money for them on the consumer end. That is something that is absolutely necessary if we want to be taken seriously as a country with our healthcare system. And again, like I pulled this up because it came out last week, and this is I suggest that everyone that's interested, and if you're listening, go look this up. The Commonwealth Fund every couple of years or every year or so has these reports that talks about a global perspective on the healthcare systems of modernized countries. And time again, the United States underperforms other modernized countries. We spend more than anybody else, any other country in the world on healthcare, but yet our health outcomes are not nearly as good. We have, I'm just going to start reading the headlines off of these graphs. You can dive into some of these. It is absolutely mind-boggling, but the U.S. spends 3 to 4 times more on healthcare than South Korea, New Zealand, and Japan. The U.S. is the only high-income country that does not guarantee healthcare coverage. U.S. life expectancy at birth is 3 years lower than the OECD average. Avoidable deaths per 100,000 population in the U.S. are higher than the OECD average. Remember, the OECD is just other modernized countries, basically. It's like European Union, Australia, Japan, etc. The U.S. has the highest rate of infant and maternal deaths. Rates of suicide were highest in the U.S., Japan, and South Korea. Deaths from assault are highest in the United States, and this one's not even close. The U.S. obesity rate is nearly double the OECD average. Adults in the U.S. are the most likely to have multiple chronic conditions. Remember, this is because of the specific one before this, a tied to obesity, but also a tie to lack of preventive health care in this country. The U.S. has the highest rate of death because of COVID-19 per 1 million. The US has among the lowest rates of physician visits and practicing physicians. That is because we have a for-profit healthcare system. Hospital stays are the shortest in the Netherlands and the US. The US has among the lowest number of hospital beds. Because again, they are profit driven. Having excess capacity in a profit driven entity leads to costs, which leads to lower profits. The US has a higher influenza vaccination rate compared to the OECD average, but its COVID-19 vaccination rate is still lower than that of many peer nations. And I'll stop there because, on that note, the United States has had over 1 million people die from COVID-19. So, all in all, the medical system, the healthcare system in this country is fundamentally broken. And if we want to fix it, we have to advocate for bold, progressive change in policy. And I think that Biden is leading us to that. You know, there are proposals that were like Mayor Pete, where he was talking about Medicare for all who want it, which kind of is, in my opinion, a milquetoast proposal. But it's another one of those things where it's like, if that actually passed, it would be monumental in moving us towards where we need to go. So we can't let the enemy be the perfect, or the good be the enemy of the perfect, but we need to continue working towards the perfect because we are America. And again, I will keep coming back to that. We are America. We are supposed to be the greatest country on earth. I believe that we are. And if we are, we should be performing at the highest level we possibly can. And our healthcare system is not doing that. The next thing I want to talk about, kind of pivoting from that issue, is Social Security and Medicare. I'll go with Medicare first. But Medicare is something that, well, I'm only going to this because I have to say that, Medicare should be expanded to all people. I think that's just the easiest way of expanding healthcare coverage to all people. Social Security is something that keeps, I think it's, don't quote me on this. I would definitely look this up, but it's about 30% of seniors out of poverty. So Social Security is single-handedly probably the best, I would argue, one of, if not the best, with Medicare. They're probably close to each other. Federal legislation that has maybe ever passed. It protects the right for seniors to retire with dignity, and I think that right needs to be expanded. But while we are talking about this, I'm going to show you this clip.
Making the wealthy pay their fair share, some Republicans.
So just to tee it up, this is Biden talking about Social Security and Medicare. While it's going to get raucous, and I will explain kind of what's happening for those just listening, and maybe you didn't watch the State of the Union, but he is about to call out Republicans. Specifically, Mike Lee has had a proposal that cuts Medicare and Social Security, but also the same thing with entitlements, what they call them. Republicans call Social Security and Medicare. They consistently try to cut these things. So this is where he is in his speech.
Some Republicans want Medicare and Social Security to sunset. I'm not saying it's a majority. Let me give you, anybody who doubts it, contact my office. I'll give you a copy. I'll give you a copy of the proposal.
So right now you can hear Marjorie Taylor Greene, who was raucous, disruptive, disrespectful throughout the whole thing. And again, like, some of this is like, oh, am I going to feign outrage about people being disrespectful in the House of Representatives? Probably not. But I think it is somewhat disrespectful, and I think it's kind of a shame to see in the House of Representatives somebody being so utterly nonsensical. But people used to beat each other with canes in the in the House of Representatives, so it's a little bit of different time.
That means Congress doesn't vote. Well, I'm glad to see you. No, I tell you, I enjoy conversion. You know, it means if Congress doesn't keep the programs the way they are, they'd go away. Other Republicans say, I'm not saying it's a majority of you. I don't even think it's even a significant.
It is a significant, like they mask it, but it is a significant portion.
But it's being proposed by individuals. I'm not politely not naming them, but it's being proposed by some of you. Look, folks.
I have to say that while doing this live, this was absolutely incredible, dark Brandon moves here.
The idea is that we're not going to be moved into being threatened to default on the debt if we don't respond. Folks, as we all apparently agree, Social Security and Medicare is off the books now, right? They're not to be stopped. All right.
So that was a standing ovation.
We got unanimity.
Standing ovation. So that was something that actually I loved to see. I loved seeing Biden go hard on Social Security and Medicare. Again, these are like the most impactful and most popular government programs to ever exist in America. And I think that was a great, some people are calling it a trap. I don't think he did that on purpose. I honestly don't think that was on purpose. And that was why I was more impressed, because I think that was on the fly on some level. And that was incredible. And that is the type of fighter that I like to see. I don't know that Biden has that in him all the time, but that is a type of like, oh, you say you want to do this. Well, you're not going to do anything to touch Medicare and Social Security because these are the most popular programs in the country. And I'm going to make sure that people know that you want to cut them, which is actually the truth. That is the legitimate truth. That was a good way to do that. Now, let me hit the last part of this healthcare kind of, I don't know the right word, like apron, curtain, like it's covering all this different stuff, right? So, it would be the opioid crisis, and specifically the fentanyl that has been, killing people. I mean, it's been absolutely ravaging this country. And fentanyl, on top of the regular opioids like Oxycontin, are things that transition people. Well, I should say fentanyl is kind of laced in things. I suppose some people do it like on purpose, but heroin is a direct link to from these other opioids that leads to death. And the opioid crisis has taken people in my life that I knew. I mean, maybe not people that I was extremely close to, luckily for me, selfishly. But I know, I mean, were people in my age that have died that I was, played football with or knew pretty closely that died from overdoses from these drugs. I think everybody knows at least somebody that has dealt with this. And interestingly enough, the policy proposals, put forth for the opioid crisis have not really been at the forefront. Again, like I'll admit, like there are things that I'm sure that I just don't know, but like even advocating for basic treatment for addiction rather than criminalization of things like heroin, or I'm drawing a blank right now on the treatment, but it's like uh the things that oh my god, this is gonna bother me, but the treatment for overdoses basically for opioids. These are things that I don't think are that radical. It's not that crazy. I think, bipartisan groups can come together in theory to say, like, hey, we should provide this for businesses to make sure that people aren't just overdosing in the middle of the street. Narcan, that's it. That's it. Providing Narcan, and this kind of, I have to say, when I ran for state representative, I talked about this. I had a proposal basically to provide Narcan training and supplies to local businesses because of the chance of people overdosing. Now there is a program within Bucks County that does similar things, but I wanted to make sure that every business had it specifically because of the engagement and interaction with the community. Rather than saying I have to go get it, I want to say that here it is, basically. Provide them training, provide the employees training, have a certification for it, basically. And I was told that like that was not enough, but there was never a counter proposal to say like what to do about it. There was never like a oh, this is something that we can do over here. And I say this because the person that was telling me was talking to me as somebody that lost somebody to this crisis. So I had to, listen to it. I'm open to the critique, but the lack of providing policy is frustrating. So again, this is where like the fentanyl thing didn't boil down to saying we need to get fentanyl off the streets because it's killing people, and opioids are supplied by pharmaceutical companies that again are profit driven. I don't know how many times I can say profit driven within one episode, but the profit motive drives them to increase supply for these things. And there are some rules, but we know, I think it's the Sackler family, are uber wealthy from these drugs. So providing real policy solutions to this issue goes beyond just saying it's an issue and we need to talk about it from an addiction perspective. And admittedly, again, I am open to growing this and saying we need to talk about it and this X, Y, and Z needs to be provided for people. But that really was the only thing that led to was a talk about the border, which I think the border is something that I have had the border is one of those things that I debate with right-wingers on because I actually don't support what Biden does at the border, but not for the reason that they don't. So right-wingers consistently underestimate the deportations, the brokenness of the system, not the wall being the system, but an actual system that processes immigrants in a humane and I'll say sane level. When you try to get refugee status in this country, you have to basically cross the border. If you want to come here to work, you have to cross the border and you have to get a visa, all this stuff, right? There are processes, but the system is broken. And I would rather be ruthless with the system and be gentle and have empathy with the individual, because you cannot blame people for wanting to come to this country if they need to get a better life. They're trying to flee gang violence, or if they just want to get a damn good job and make it and live the American dream. That is the American dream. Being from an immigrant, I mean, like all of us are basically, I mean, there's probably few people, I mean, obviously indigenous people, but there are a few people I'm sure that have had people since like 1700s, but like I'm only like a third generation, I guess, something like that. Like only, less than 100 years ago, like great grandparents are coming over here, right? So that is the American dream. But Biden talks about like having all this, strength and all this stuff at the border. Like, I don't, it doesn't do anything for me. I think we need to have comprehensive immigration reform. That is something that I would say we need to do. But him talking about having immigration reform on the table is good, but he's basically flexing his like, yeah, I deported all these people and, whatever. And the Republicans never, ever admit to the fact that they actually helped create the problem where they perpetuate this lie that, oh, Biden's just letting everybody in. Biden's letting everyone in. And then what happens is that there are desperate people that they go, oh, well, if this is true, because again, they don't know or they don't know. They do know or they don't know, whatever, right? Like, they just have to guess. Maybe this media is the truth. Maybe they are letting more people in, and I'm going to take the risk to get my family and my kids there because I think we deserve a better life. And I think most people think that they believe that they have that right. But the Republicans don't want to cede the ground that Democrats are bad, just as bad on the border as they are. And I don't mean that in like they're just letting everyone in, because we're not. And not to say that I think we should let everybody in, but I think, again, that system is broken. And we ignore time and time again that we should be protecting people, not punishing people. That is that issue, I suppose. But let me talk about more broadly the economy. Now, Biden started off with the economy being up front, but I didn't want to lead off with that, but it is vital. It is a key talking point, and I think this is where Biden touting some of his wins was, again, very important. Inflation. Let's talk about inflation. Inflation has been going down for the last 6 months. Gas prices have been going down for the last 6 months. It is down over $1.50 from the peak on average. Now, there are always fluctuations. This is something that we have to understand. Global supply chains are not solely impacted by the United States and the president of the United States at that. But remember that the United States inflation rate is lower than that of European comparables, to some of the Asian comparables, to Scandinavian countries. Like, even someone like me always looks at the economy and says, like, we should look to them in many cases. The United States has lower inflation rates at this point because of a number of different choices. And again, some of these choices are good, some of these choices are bad. The Fed is going to continue raising interest rates, which is why I said in the beginning, if we don't fall into a recession, a lot of what the Inflation Reduction Act will do will be felt in the positive, like greatly felt. That would be catastrophic, though, if the Fed basically pushes us into a recession, which will increase unemployment. Now, here's the crux of this all, is that they never talk about this. And I say by they, I mean the corporate media, I mean politicians. The Fed and economists treat this as an equation. An inverse equation, I should say, really. Because when they're plugging away at all the inputs of inflation, they're also plugging away at the inputs of unemployment. Now, while unemployment goes down, the chance of inflation going up is higher because wages are going to be driven by that lack of supply, increase in demand of labor. That is a good form of inflation. Inflation is not inherently bad. Remember this. There is a certain level of inflation that keeps an economy healthy. An economy based on endless growth, which is what most capitalist economies purport to do, needs a level of inflation. Not 10%, but 2 to 4% is probably within the range of reasonable expectations. And yes, I did Photoshop my face on Biden for the thumbnail. I didn't do it. Josh did it. But if we look at this equation, when we see unemployment go up, inflation will come down. But remember that unemployment rising is people losing their jobs, people being foreclosed on their houses, people losing their health care, people dying. So when we talk about these issues, these are choices. What do you prioritize? And inflation is already going down, so why are you talking about raising rates to increase unemployment? They'll never actually come out and say that they want to increase unemployment, but that is what is necessary for this equation to work. While continuing to tout, though, Biden's positive stuff, unemployment is at a near historic low in the 3% That is incredibly strong unemployment rates. People always want to say nobody wants to work anymore. That is not the case. People want to work with dignity. People deserve wages where they can pay to live, to have food, to have housing. These are basic necessities. And the American way of life should not be you have to pick yourself up by your bootstraps, because that is not possible, because you cannot physically do that. And number two here, we are the greatest country on earth. And if we are not expected to have an economy that works for the average person, then we are not the greatest country that we purport to be. I believe that the American exceptionalism should be that everyone has the chance to make it, and we have a bare minimum standard of certain people's living expectations. That is not a radical notion. This is something that we need to reevaluate. The economy is something that is driven by expectations, not by reality sometimes. The expectation is that we are going to go into a recession. So that's why I say this, and it scares me. But unemployment is down. Record number of jobs being created. These are solid things that under Joe Biden, he should be freaking proud of. I will warn, and like obviously this is just for us, but I am hopeful that real wages are on the rise right now because the unemployment rate is low, but real wages have been stagnant for 50 years. So if we want to see real wages rising and we want to see consumer purchasing power increase, we want to see less debt. We want to see more people going to school and getting education and getting good jobs, being able to retire. We have to protect unions. We have to protect, the basic wage earner. We need to protect and raise the minimum wage. None of this stuff was really highlighted. Biden talked about passing the PRO Act, which is supporting a union, basically unionization for private unions, which is good, but it's not far enough. And he also talked about a billionaire tax, and he talked about a stock buyback tax. These are good things to talk about in theory, and I like hearing them, but remember, a wealth tax, which is probably suitable for more than just billionaires, but whatever, that is something that I think a lot of people would support because it doesn't actually impact most people, one, but two, it raise funds and redistribute money, which that's what we need to do. Reducing inequality actually increases happiness within your country. Google that. But number two, the stock buyback portion is a good, rhetorical thing. But in my opinion, if I was giving the State of the Union, which I am right now, I guess, but I would say you should ban stock buybacks, and Congress people should be banned from trading stocks. We should not have insider trading like that. That is absolute bullshit. And I think that they give themselves priority. And stock buybacks is a way to manipulate and arbitrarily inflate the price of stocks of publicly traded companies, and it should be banned. Now, violence, crime, police brutality. I'll roll this all in together. Crime is on the decline. Remember that it spiked under COVID, but it is on the decline. That is good. Gun violence is on the rise in many cities across the country. We look at it in my public administration courses. We look at gun violence specifically in Philadelphia, and it is mind-boggling to just think about the increase in gun violence for like basically nothing. There is just like nonsensical violence for no reason. And it is because people have easy and readily accessible guns. Biden called for a ban on assault weapons. That is a great first step. Remember, there used to be an assault weapons ban that was removed, but also that we should recall that the majority of crime committed with a firearm is committed with handguns. So if we really want to get serious about combating gun violence, we should look at certain restrictions on handguns. We should look at gun buyback programs. We should look at different ways to reduce the availability of guns on the streets, and magazine capacity limits. Frankly, license registration and insurance for gun owners. I think that's a basic necessity at this point. And then we'll go to police brutality. And police brutality is important based on what happened. Well, it's important broadly speaking because of the Black Lives Matter movement. But with Tyree Nichols' murder, just 2 weeks ago, and I won't rehash that whole situation, but his parents were there, and Biden highlighting that and talking about getting rid of or restricting. He didn't say get rid of no-knock warrants, which is good. But the thing is that we need to go beyond that. And here's, again, I'll just highlight this really quickly because I think this is important. And it's not talked about in the political realm very much. But if we want to make the police's job easier, but we also want to respect and build up a community of people that have historically been oppressed, is we have to dismantle this culture of guns. If we want to make it so that the assumption isn't that, every young black, let's be clear here. The assumption is that everybody has a gun. Like that is what the cops operate under. So if we really want to undermine that notion and protect both the police from making mistakes, but also people that are unarmed, people that even, frankly, are armed but are doing so legally, all of this stuff, right? There's every shade of gray. You need to break the hold of guns on the streets because police are afraid because so many people have guns. And there is an actual increase in gun violence. Stopping mass shootings is a different thing than stopping one-off killings, but they are both vital, and I think need to be continued to be hammered on, and actual legislation must be passed to do that. Now, what did Biden hit on but didn't really talk too much in depth was, one, LGBTQ plus protections. Now, we will talk about, I'm going to show one clip after this of Sarah Huckabee Sanders, but Republicans are like going bananas saying that he is so woke, but he's not talking about the wokeness in his speech because he knows that people are gonna be revolting against it. But it's like, that is not really it. Biden's never been, quote, woke, but also there are very few things that the Republicans talk about that are really happening or are actual issues. I had a conversation, and I'll slight tangent here, with a friend last night at the gym about the issue of trans kids. And I basically laid out this whole thing where I said, statistically speaking, X, Y, and Z. And, I know certain people, and like you can talk to them. They know that they are who they are, and why should the government have the authority to oppress them, etc. Right? This is just classic social libertarianism, really. But the reality is that Americans are not where we need to be on the LGBTQ plus issue because there is no federal or state in Pennsylvania or local in Doylestown Township protections based on sexual orientation and gender, not sex, but gender. Because the Civil Rights Act protects people based on certain inalienable I don't even know if that's the correct term now. Now I'm getting myself mixed up. It's getting late. But the things that they can't even control, right? So like if you are like the Civil Rights Act protects people based on race. You don't choose your race. And frankly, even if you did, like you choose your religion, you should still have protections based on that to not be discriminated against. Now, that is a federal protection for those things, but that does not exist for the LGBTQ plus community, specifically based on gender identity and sexual orientation, which is something that every State of the Union by a Democratic president should be talking about until a federal protection is passed. That is something that Biden talks about it quickly. He goes, yeah, we needed to, blah, blah, blah. And he actually said LGBTQ, which is, everyone was shocked about that. He didn't, mess it up. But, actually passing civil rights protections for people is positive. It is practical and it is doable. And it would save lives. It would protect dignity for people. Again, this is where the through line of all these things is protecting people's rights and protecting dignity and ensuring freedom. Like these are American ideals here, not just like woke progressive ideals. This is genuine American patriot ideas. The last thing I want to talk about here too is education. The only real thing that Biden talked about in his speech, and again, I agree with him, so this was good. He's only speaking for an hour, right? So, I've almost been speaking for an hour, so we can critique things for things being left out, but I'm only critiquing it because I think these are important things. Education, he said that public school teachers need a raise, which I'm sure my friends in the chat will agree. But beyond that, public education, and this is where I don't know that I have the exact answer, but K through 12 needs to be, the funding of K through 12 needs to be re-examined and be dissected from real estate taxes, because real estate taxes providing the funding for these schools creates wealth inequality and an educational gap between people that have money and those who don't. When you have underfunded schools, the state is supposed to step in, but states have been continuously underfunding schools. In the city of Philadelphia, since the passage of the SOTA tax, there has been universal pre-K. That does not exist outside of many major cities. So developing pre-K, one, helps educate people, which increases the likelihood. And I believe, I don't know if it was Biden that said this or it might have been him in the speech, which was good. Talking about having access to pre-K increases the likelihood of somebody graduating from high school by 50%. And the second part is that if we live in a capitalist society, shocker, we do, having the ability to basically send kids to preschool makes it so that parents don't have to spend inordinate amounts of money paying for childcare that they can't afford, or having a another adult. Well, there's two options here: having one parent stay home and not work, which is reducing the wages, or having a grandparent stay home and watch the kid, which then also reduces the earning capacity of the senior. Now, that, in my opinion, I don't think that like old people should have to work. That's kind of my opinion, but I think you should actually be able to retire in this country. That's besides the point. But parents should have the ability to have pre-K for their kids so that they can go to work, earn a living, and then pay for the things that they need to in the economy that we live within. That is something that it should be an uncontroversial universal right. Education should not just be the 12 years of school that we have right now, or 13, I suppose, with kindergarten. But then what was also ignored was the student loan crisis, which Biden probably should have, if he's gonna go like sparring with the Republicans, talked about the student loan holdup and the Republican BS that has been kind of holding it up in the courts. Remember that Biden canceled $10,000 of student loan debt, which he absolutely has the constitutional authority to do as the executive. But Republican nonsense has had it being tied up in the court system. And also, piggybacking off that further, and, you know, these are things that he's talked about, but we need to look at publicly tuition free, at least. Now, this is, we're going to go from just my proposals and like some actual proposals that are practical. So my actual proposal would be tuition free public universities in every single state, at least one. You can narrow that down and say at least have tuition free community colleges in your county, on the county level. We used to have many of those throughout the country. Now we don't. On top of that, because then I can already hear it coming, but I think this is also important, and frankly, might be more important, should be tuition free 2-year and trade school for people that don't want to go to college. Apprenticeships and all that stuff. I think you shouldn't be able to have unpaid internships and apprenticeships, but that's, you know, again, that goes with the economy and the wage portion of this argument here. But that part of education has been left out and continues to be something that we struggle with. But I'll say this in closing here. I thought this was one of the strongest showings by Joe Biden in his entire presidency. This was better than any speech that he gave campaigning. And I think it was better than the other two speeches he did, like the equivalents of the State of the Unions. I don't love the overemphasis of the potential of bipartisanship right now, because the potential is very low. I think if there was real bipartisan nature going on, where we had all these different people coming together and say, we're going to do this, 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 then maybe. But Kevin McCarthy is really radical. Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, all these people are like really kind of gaining traction. So we're not really dealing with like, we have a slight difference on like tax policy and saying like, I want it to be 42%, you want it to be 35%. Like, that's not really where we're at. So his overemphasis of bipartisanship throughout this was kind of, it's not disappointing. I think it's idealistic, but that's what it is. Like, I don't know. I go back and forth with it. I think I think in a State of the Union, it's supposed to be like, bringing people together. But that leads us to, of course, the uh, Republican response. And I'm not going to play all of it. I'm not going to go on and on and on about this, but this was Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who you recall was the professional liar, or AKA the press secretary for Donald Trump in his administration. She is also the daughter of Mike Huckabee, who was the governor of Arkansas before her. Not directly before her, but a few years ago. And this is Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who was given the green light to be the counter to Joe Biden.
On this earth for such a time as this, to charge boldly ahead. I'll be the first to admit, President Biden and I don't have a lot in common. I'm for freedom, he's for government control.
See, that's like, this is where, like, I'm not going to, because you guys are we're already over an hour into the show, but I could pause this probably every 5 seconds and say, Biden is for government control, says the leader of the party in Arkansas that I don't know exactly all the restrictions on abortion in Arkansas, but the Republican Party is not exactly pro freedom right now. But we'll continue.
At 40, I'm the youngest governor in the country. And at 8,
cool. That's cool. I mean, it's upsetting that the Republicans are outflanking Democrats on electing young people, but that doesn't really mean much. Yeah, Biden's old. Cool.
80, he's the oldest president in American history. I'm the first woman to lead my state, and he's the first man to surrender his presidency to a woke mob that can't even tell you what a woman is.
I'm going to pause it there while I'm scratching my eye just to say that that's not true. And also, like, did the woke mob just come out of nowhere? Are we acting like these people wouldn't have called Barack Obama, all of this stuff 8 years ago? Come on.
In the radical left's America, Washington taxes you and lights your hard-earned money on fire. But you get crushed with high gas prices, empty grocery.
Gas prices have been going down. Grocery stores were hit by supply chain issues. Remember that an avian flu is why that there's no eggs, not because we're just tossing eggs out and we're randomly seeing increases in prices of eggs.
Shelves, and our children are taught to hate one another.
No, they're not. They're literally being taught American history. And if being taught history teaches you to hate, then that's a problem with you and your parenting style, not the actual lesson or the teacher.
On account of their race, but not to love one another or our great country.
You can have, I said I wouldn't pause it every couple seconds, but you can have a critique of this country and still love it. You can teach about the abominations and the atrocities and still look towards the good stuff as well, because the overwhelming majority of stuff is mixed. That's kind of the key to remember in history.
Whether Joe Biden believes this madness or is simply too weak to resist it, his administration
there's nothing actually substantive in that.
Has been completely hijacked by the radical left.
How?
The dividing line in America is no longer between right or left. The choice is between normal.
Normal being in her mind, normal is the people that storm the Capitol, but normal being just people that accept other people, that let people live their lives, that want to have a more equitable society. But no, normal and the woke liberals.
Or crazy. It's time for a new generation of Republican leadership. Upon taking office just a few weeks ago, I signed executive orders to ban CRT.
Which was never taught in schools. It hasn't been taught in schools across the country. But, of course, in Arkansas, which has significantly underperforming public education, this is the focus that they want to spend on.
Racism and indoctrination in our schools. Eliminate the use of derogatory term Latinx in our government. Repealed COVID orders and said never again to authoritarian mandates and shutdowns. Americans want common sense from their leaders. But in Washington...
I'm going to cut her off here, but common sense, of course, in her mind is if there's a global pandemic, you can't have the authority to respond to it. That's kind of what she wants for sanity, and that's the normal, supposedly. But yeah, that is what we're dealing with now. All in all, I think that the outlook for America is better now than it was, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, certainly under Trump, in my opinion. Do I think that Biden is like the greatest president ever? No. But I think that a lot of what he has done is progressive. It is ignoring an ideological lens. It is just good. And of course, I think that there's a million things that we could do more or better. But again, progress is slow. Passing these things is vital. And, I could say this, and I'll say this at the end of my State of the Union, is that I am damn proud to be an American, but I am not willing to roll over and take a beating when it comes to my local government, looking at you, Central Bucks, my state government, or my federal government, taking away people's rights, stomping on our history, ignoring our history, and not building something that is great. Because we are living, if you live in America, in my opinion, the greatest country on earth, as I've said throughout this. But you cannot tout being the greatest country on earth if you stop striving to get better. The second you stop trying to get better as an individual or as a country is when you might as well pack it in and call it a day, because that is when you are dead. You have to constantly be improving yourself as a country to say, you know what, we have a homelessness problem. We have to solve that. We can't just let people live on the streets. We have a wealth inequality problem in this country. We can't let it continue to get worse and let the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. We have a racism problem, and we do. And rather than I'll say this, but rather than both sides LARPing about stupid issues around this, we have to actually tackle real racism, systematic oppression of people, whether that be black people or Muslim people. I mean, we can look at it in a million different lenses, right? We have to stop letting ourselves get divided over these stupid small things, like a character being recasted or something like that, and look at systematic oppression of people and systematic inequities, whether that be towards racism or wealth inequality or healthcare. We live in a country of abundance, of greatness. And until we recognize the fact that we have not only the ability to, but the responsibility to take care of everybody in our country, we will continue to have to face the fact that we are not living up to our potential. And in my opinion, America is better than that. And I think that we should keep striving to be the best. But with that being said, that is all I have for you tonight. If you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button on YouTube. We are finally over 100 subscribers. You can hit the thumbs up button to help us get into the algorithm. You can listen to the show on wherever you find your podcasts. You can support the show on social media at Greater Society Media on Instagram, on Facebook, and on TikTok. And you can follow me on Twitter at Con O'Hanlon. You can support the show at patreon.com/Greater Society Media. And if you so choose, you can join us in the Discord server. And I'll continue to try to let people on if you go to the voice chat in there, but we have not had any takers yet. Someday, though. Someday we will. But until then, stay safe. Peace.